All right, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Tom Noland. Tom grew up in Northern Ohio, and he did his undergraduate at The Ohio State University. And it was there that in a botany course, he first got turned on to spring ephemeral wildflowers. His love for spring ephemerals evolved into a lifelong interest of botanizing and growing wildflowers. He went on and completed a PhD in plant sciences at the University of Arkansas, and later made his way to Canada, where he took up a position as a forestry scientist for the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. There, his work focused on remote sensing of forests, tree seed germination, and seedling physiology and biochemistry. After a very productive career at the Ontario Forest Research Institute, he retired back to the US some 18 months ago, I understand. And we're very fortunate that he chose Kalamazoo as his retirement home. And he quickly became involved with the Wild Ones, our chapter, and for which we are extremely grateful. Tonight, he's going to share his knowledge and experience in growing wildflowers from seeds and share some of his lovely plants, photos, and some folklore of native wildflowers. So please join me in welcoming Tom Noland.
Thank you, Anne. I have to thank the Wild Ones for giving me this opportunity to bombard you with my passion, growing wildflowers from seed, because this is something that probably first got interested in from my mother, who was a wildflower type of person. She grew up in Pennsylvania. Her favorite one was the mountain laurel, which was the state shrub of Pennsylvania. So I'm going to start my presentation here, and let's see. My background is I started out with my PhD research actually investigating the physiology of dormancy in sugar pine seed. This gave me a lot of information about the technical and scientific things that keep seeds from germinating. Now, which is more important, that or 30 years of wildflower growing experience? Well, I have to tell you, the devil is in the details. So the growing of wildflowers is a little bit more important here, but you do need to know what you're doing. And plus I have 50 years. I started gardening. My mom was a big gardener, so was my dad, when I was a teenager. So here's what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to go through some seed biology and germination, basic information, just to remind you. I know some people here probably this is going to be boring, but I want to make sure you have at least the basics of what's going on when seeds germinate. Then we're going to go into the main part of the talk, which is growing and propagating native plants. Then we're going to get kind of an interesting little sideline towards the end with a little help from our friends, and you'll find out what this is later on. And then I'm going to talk about some exotic native wildflowers. Exotic meaning either they aren't native to Michigan, or if they are, they're very rare. So here's the basic seed biology for a dicot there on the left, which is a bean seed. And it's mostly embryo, 2 big cotyledons, and then you got a monocot corn seed on the right, which is about half embryo and half endosperm, which is the nutritional part of the seed. And when these germinate, here's an example of a bean seed germination. You have the bean, first the root comes out, it gets established, then the shoot comes out, and then the cotyledons come up, and then the actual shoot forms with leaves. Now, this type of germination is where the cotyledons are above the ground. It's called epigeous, just meaning it's above. Some things like peas have hypogeous germination, which means the cotyledons stay underneath the ground. Germination and dormancy. Now, most wild seeds, and even some cultivated seeds, have seed dormancy as a survival mechanism. If they came at the middle, they came and germinated as soon as they came off the plant in late summer, fall, or even in the spring. Some seeds come off in late spring. They generally would not have a very good winter survival. So what is dormancy here? Well, there are two main types of dormancy. Physical, which means usually something in the seed coat is causing the seed not to be able to germinate. Then physiological, usually found in the embryos, but can also be found in soft tissues that surround the seed. And it gets kind of complicated because sometimes you can have a combination of both physical and physiological. So we're going to talk about the physical seed dormancy first. And this is when germination is prevented by the seed coat not letting water, air, or both into the seed. You don't get any water, you don't get any air, the seed can't germinate. So it's fairly common type of seed dormancy, especially legumes, they have hard seed coats. Scarification of the coat by acid treatment, hot water. You can scarify them by sandpaper or file treatments, or you can just remove the whole seed coat to get rid of this type of dormancy. And there are some things that, and I won't be talking about this, but some things actually have to go through a digestive system to actually get the whole seed to the point where it can germinate. Then it gets deposited with a nice little bit of fertilizer. So, physiological seed dormancy is rather complex. Seeds fail to germinate despite having water, the proper temperature, air, and everything it needs to go through germination. So germination actually has 3 stages. First stage is solely physical. You just take up water, the seed imbibes. Second stage is physiological. All of the biochemical types of activities to get growth going start. Then the third stage is the actually grows. So you have physiological seed germination. It takes up water. Some of the physiology starts, but not enough to make it grow. So this is usually caused, physiological dormancy is usually caused by blocks in the seed or surrounding tissue, soft tissues, usually chemical, but you can have seeds that, whenever they're shed from the plant, don't have a mature embryo, so they have to go through a ripening period after they come off the plant. So here's where we get complicated. Physiological seed dormancy usually is a stratification procedure. Moist cold, 40 degrees, warm type of moistness to break the dormancy. Most wildflowers require cold. Some, like Turk's cap lily, I'm not going to talk about it, I'm just using that as an example, have both requirements for warm and cold stratification. Some seeds need a seed coat treatment and stratification to germinate. So that's where it gets complicated. And some seeds need light or dark in order to germinate. And we're going to have some of those in the ones I'm going to be talking about. So, wildflower seed collection, the best collection source is from a garden. Talk to Tom Small, he's got all kinds of species he might let you have a few seeds from. But if you do it from the wild, it should be done sustainably. You really only should collect from medium to large populations of wildflowers or native plants, which means 20 or more plants in whatever population you're looking at. Collect from a maximum of 5%, which means 1 in 20. That's why 20 is sort of the minimum. And do not ever collect from a rare or endangered plant species. Not good. Okay, here's my simple-minded but easy stratification method. I get some moist, soilless mix, and I put it into a plastic bag. Then I put the seeds into that plastic bag. I label it. I place the bags and seeds in the refrigerator. This is for cold. And then, here's the critical part. I mark it on my calendar when it's supposed to come out for germination, because if I don't do that, oh, when did I put those in? So, we're gonna get into the main part of the talk here, which is growing and propagating wildflowers. Now, I'm gonna focus on seed, but sometimes vegetative propagation is the best way to go, and it's often easier. So I will talk about both on almost all the species. Because sometimes you might have a source for vegetative propagation, sometimes you might have seed. You can choose. But I'll tell you which one's the best in these species. Now, you're going to be exposed to my bias. These are the ones I grow. These are the ones I like. If your favorite isn't here, just shoot me. I will feature spring wildflower species, but I will also have some late summer, fall type species, and one of my favorite woody natives in the species I'm going to be talking about here. Number 1, early spring Dutchman's Breeches. My favorite early spring wildflower. Cute little pantaloons on a spike there, just kind of dancing around in the wind, but gorgeous foliage too. I liked the foliage even after the flowers die off. It requires 1 month of stratification. You really need to use fresh seed. I have never really done this from seed. I've only gotten bulblets, which are the little mini bulbs at the bottom, and that's probably the best way to propagate. I've always had good luck with that. Another really nice early spring wildflower, Bloodroot. Now, in terms of folklore, this, and actually science, this is a medicinal plant. It's called Bloodroot, as probably most of you know, because it has a beautiful orange-red sap. That orange-red sap contains a compound called sanguinarian, which makes sense because the scientific name is Sanguinaria canadensis. They usually, when you have a compound isolated from a plant, they usually name it after the plant, scientific name. And that has been used, I don't know if it is anymore, but it has been used to kill dental bacteria in dental uses. Now, this is one where you should sow any fresh seed immediately. Don't dry it, store it, or stratify it, because this is a fresh seed only type of propagation for this species. Now, the rhizomes are also good for propagation, and that's usually what I've done. I've found really nice, big, huge clumps of bloodroot, or had somebody give me one, or get a couple plants out of it. Like where I used to live in the Sioux, there were a couple huge areas where you'd have, maybe 100, 125 plants, and like 50, 25, 40 plants in a clump. It was really nice. So it's easy to do by the rhizomes, but there's a trick, which I'll talk about later in terms of having it grown from seed. So now we're going to go into another really early wildflower, yellow trout lily. This picture was actually taken close to my house where I used to live in the Sioux before I moved Sioux, Ontario. Before I moved down here in the forest, or actually the edge of the forest. This is another one where you want to use fresh seed, and it will, after you plant it, it will germinate the next spring. Again, it needs a cold period, moist period. and the dry seed does not germinate well. But as you can see from this picture, it just propagates itself by little bulblets like crazy. It's almost a weed where I came from. So that is probably the best method to actually propagate this particular species. Now, probably my favorite mid-spring season wildflower. This is a picture from my Sioux garden of Virginia bluebells. I actually bought some plants at a horticultural plant sale, but you can take fresh seed and sow it immediately or stratify it for 6 weeks and then plant it. It can be divided when they go dormant, and I found it self-seeds, not aggressively, but it self-seeds in my garden. And most of the plants you see here were probably from little seedlings that popped up a year after the seed dropped off the original plants. It just has this beautiful bell-like blue color to it, which is blues other than brown and green. It's the most unusual plant color for flowers. Okay, got to do the white trillium. Again, you need to sow this from fresh seed, and it will probably germ the next spring. Dry seed does not germinate well, I know. I collected some trillium seed one time, planted them in my garden, but they had dried out before I planted them. Never came up. I've seen reports of it taking 7 to 8 years for dry seed to actually come up. So if you plant them immediately, you're going to get it much better. And I actually listened to a talk one time on somebody talking about propagating trillium from seed. And he said, fresh seed is absolutely the way to go. Now, you can also score the rhizome after it finishes flowering and maybe sprinkle it with a little fungicide so it doesn't rot. Then you'll get little bulblets forming by next spring, and you can use those to plant out in your garden. Another classic, wild Columbine. Seed needs 30 days of stratification. It also self-seeds. I've grown many of these from seed. They're very easy to go. You can dry them out, then stratify them, and they grow. They germinate usually really well, and they grow well. You can divide it in fall, but the roots tend to be fragile. So I think seed's probably the better way to go for this particular species. And just love those little dangling red and yellow flowers. Now, this one, the scientific name is Aquilegia. That actually comes from the flower shape that looks like eagle claws. That's where the Aquilegia name comes from. So that's kind of interesting. Another classic here, Foamflower, very tiny seeds. You really should seed the fresh seed into pots first, and then keep them moist, and then transplant your seedlings into the garden the next spring, and you can even put the pots outside as long as you keep them moist. Mature plants can be divided in the fall, early spring. This one's usually pretty readily available from nurseries and like for native plants. So I've only ever bought plants either at a horticultural sale or from a nursery, but you can grow it from seed. Wild ginger. This one I really don't grow for the flowers, because if you look real close at the bottom of those leaves, there's a very dark purple flower at the base of the plant. It's hard to find, but they have beautiful heart-shaped leaves. Now, this one, again, is best grown from seed by using fresh seed right in the spring. It's one of the more complicated ones. This one actually requires that warm and then cold stratification, which probably indicates that when the seed is shed from the flower or from the fruit, it probably has an immature embryo. May take up to 2 years to germinate. I've only ever grown this one from rhizomes, and that's probably the easiest way to go. Now, large flowered bellwort. Another little bit of a complicated one. It actually requires a warm and then a cold stratification. It definitely does have immature embryos that need to mature after it's shed from the plant. Fresh seed should be used, but it is a little tricky to grow from seed. I've always purchased plants or got a division from somebody else for this one. So this one you can grow from seed, but it's probably better if you get a vegetative type of propagation. Here's one of my mainstay late spring bloomers. This is actually a picture of Blue Star from my garden. Actually, I think this one's from this garden here. Very easy to grow from seed. I have seed of this back over there where that Michigan Wildflowers poster is, which was one of my Christmas presents. So you can tell what I really love. All you really need to do is take their long cylindrical seeds, just nip off the end of it, soak it for 2 days. So it's kind of a physical seed coat dormancy. It's easy to grow from seed. I've always had good luck with this. If you take cuttings in May, they can also be rooted. You can also divide the plant in the fall. But I like the kind of steely blue star flowers that it produces. Now, I had to include an orchid. Even though I doubt if anybody in this room, including myself, has ever grown one from seed. There's a reason for that. The seeds are tiny. Orchids are one of the most advanced plants of the plant kingdom. The seeds often only have 100 cells. They need a mycorrhizae to infect them to make that seed develop and differentiate into a seed that will actually grow. Plus, they need that mycorrhizae to grow as a type of mycorrhizae is a fungus that has a relationship with the roots. It actually provides nutrients to the plant, and the plant provides it with energy in the form of sugar. So these yellow lady slippers actually require limey soils to grow. I've found these in the nature growing on limestone type sites, but I have either gotten my plants from a nursery or a friend, or actually bought these plants these were from my garden in the Sioux, from a horticultural society sale. Classic Jack-in-the-Pulpit. I've grown many Jack-in-the-Pulpits from seed. They have that beautiful spring flower, but then they have that beautiful spike with the orange-red seeds all around it and a nice spike. You collect those seeds, you get rid of the fleshy part, you stratify the seeds for 60 days. You can sow them inside or outside. They generally germinate pretty well, but you got to be careful because if you put them outside, you kind of have to mark where they are because the initial seed leaf is only a single leaf. Then next year you might get one trifoliate leaf, and maybe in 2 or 3 more years you might get 2 trifoliates in a flower. It's a slow grower, but it's nice. Culver's root. I've tried to grow this one from seed without success. I bought some plants and I tried to collect seed and tried to get them to germinate, and even though I stratified them, they didn't germinate for me. It can be divided in the fall. My love for this particular flower is this is one of the best pollinator flowers I've ever grown in my garden. Bees, bumblebees, hoverflies, all kinds of pollinators just, shoo, it's like a vacuum. They just suck into those nice white spikes, and you see this cloud of pollinators when they're in full bloom. It's pretty cool. Spiderwort. This one also requires fresh seed, and it really will germinate from fresh seed in 4 to 6 weeks. So I've grown this in my garden. It's self-seeded in my garden. I bought plants, so I didn't really start it from seed. But if you do dry the seeds out, they require 3 months of stratification. You can do stem cuttings and root them, or divide it in the fall. This is a fairly, I think I've got some from the actual last year's plant exchange at Tom's house. And this is a lighter version. Most of them are a little bit more purple than this, but this is one that actually came up from seed, and it kind of has that nice purple picotee around a white center, which I really liked. Okay, mayapple. Plant fresh seed or stratify stored seed for 90 days, if you can find seed. I've seen mayapples a lot. I've seen them in flower, I've seen them with green fruit. Never, ever, in all of my botanizing, seen one with a ripe fruit. Those fruits are candy to most animals. So if you want these, you better, when the fruit is developing in green, you better put a little mesh bag around it if you want to get any seed off these. But they're usually readily available at nurseries. You can also divide them in the late summer or fall. And it's because of its peltate leaf, which basically looks like an umbrella. It's kind of a different shape. And even though the flowers are nice, it's really the foliage I think is the best. Now we're going to go to liverleaf or hepatica. The one you see on the right is really deep purple, and the one you see on the left is like more of a lavender color. That's actually from my garden here. So I planted some last spring, and they actually bloomed this spring again. Now I cheated a little bit on this picture. The ones on the right I bought from the Horticultural Society sale in the Sioux, and those are not native. Those are European hepatica. But they sure have a nice color. And unless you knew what the species was, you'd swear they were just the same as the ones we have here, other than the color. So these are, again, ones where you can sow fresh seeds immediately, but they need a warm and then a cold stratification. So they're not easy to grow from seed. Better to really grow them from root cuttings or division. And I've had these, and they will like, especially the European ones, but also the American hepatica. And I think these are the round-lobed hepatica, not the sharp lobes. They will occasionally self-seed. This is one probably most of you don't really have much experience with. This is red baneberry. The seed needs a cold stratification. It may take 2 years. But I've grown this in my garden in the Sioux. It self-seeds. It may take 2 years, but not aggressively, but there's these little plants coming up here and there, and I spread it to different places in my yard. And I have a picture of the flower, which I'm not showing you, because it's really the fruit that has the appeal. This beautiful, bright to crimson red fruit in the late summer. And I think I've seen animals that like to chew on it too, so I think it's actually may have a little bit of wildlife value. Now, I've only bought the plant and then, did I grow it from seed? Yeah. Was it something I did? No. Was it something the plant did itself? Yeah. So I'll take advantage of that. I'm lazy. But you can divide the plant in early spring before it really grows out. And for most of these, for this, that's probably the easiest way, unless you have a plant that self-seeds. Another really nice spring wildflower is woodland blue phlox. Requires 60 days of stratification and dark conditions to germinate. You can divide it in early spring and fall, but rabbits and deer like to chew on this one, so if you got one, you may want to cover it up in early spring when they're looking for something to grow, to eat, that's growing in your garden. Next one is one, I think it has one of the more interesting flower shapes. This is pink turtlehead. Now the scientific name for the pink turtlehead is chilon. Chilon is the Greek word for a tortoise. So the head, the flower to me looks like what it's named after. It's turtle head or tortoise head. You can grow fresh seed in moist soil, or you can take cuttings in June and root them, divide it in the spring. I brought some seed. It's right over the back there by the poster. Okay, now you're getting to my favorite late summer wildflower, Cardinal Flower. Small seeds that germinate well require 60 days of stratification. You can let them dry out and then stratify them. This one, I have divided the plants and planted them, but it's a major, major hummingbird attractant. The picture you see on the right is actually from my garden in the Sioux. I had so many beautiful cardinal flowers. There was a hummingbird who camped out right behind there in that lilac bush behind those things, and he sat there most of the day. When another hummingbird came to his domain, he chased him out of there real quick. So if you want to watch hummingbirds do some funny things and fight, get yourself a lot of cardinal flowers. Now, I didn't bring any flowers or seeds of this. However, I have some started. You come to Tom's Small Place in June, I'll have some for you. Boneset. This is another medicinal plant. Obviously, it's named for its medicinal use. It used to be used as a herbal medicine when people broke their bones to help the bones set. Whether it really worked or not, I don't know, but that's how it got its name. Now this one requires light and 30 days of stratification. It is a late summer bloomer into the fall, so you can plant the seeds in fall, like the cardinal flower, which I didn't mention before, but it likes a wet site. You can divide the plant in early spring or fall, and you can see it does bloom late in the season because there's a cardinal flower there right in front of the boneset. Okay, now we're going to my other favorite late summer bloomer. And I like these because they bloom when there's not much else blooming in the garden. This is, August, September. This is great blue lobelia, the blue form on the right, and the rarer white form on the left. I have some seed over there, and I have a few plants over there. So those plants were just transplanted into those peat pots a couple days ago. So they need about a month to get really established before you can put them out in your garden, but they're over there on that table. Again, small seeds, and I use that that stratification method I was showing you earlier. But they germinate at a high rate, and the only real trick is usually they germinate so well that they're very densely packed, and you kind of have to pick them apart and try to keep them from damaging the roots. Again, a major attractant for hummingbirds. Now I'm going to give you my favorite actual combination of wildflower plants in my garden. Red, white, and blue lobelias, all blooming at the same time. This, again, is a picture from my Sioux garden where I had a nice bed. I had some black-eyed Susans in there too, but it was mostly red, white, and blue lobelias. Cardinal flower, great blue red, or great blue white, great blue blue, and that's just my favorite color combination for flowers. Maybe my only way that I have any patriotic types of expression in my garden. Okay, here's one of my favorite woody plants, redbud. I brought some seed. It's over there if you want some. Very easy to grow. It doesn't require stratification, but it does have a hard seed coat, so you gotta hot water, soak it overnight. I just get some water that either boiling or close to boiling, put it on the seeds. It has to be hot initially. That softens up the seed coat. That allows it to germinate, and the germination is usually good. I grew some last year. I have 3 plants I'm going to plant out into my garden later on in the spring. And because it doesn't require a whole lot of manipulation to grow, it's very easy to grow from seed. Now, for the rest of the story, with a little help from our friends. Okay, so here we have ants collecting a seed with an elaiosome on the left. Then we have some Trillium seeds on the right that have elaisomes. Ants will collect Trillium, Bloodroot, Dutchman's Breeches, Trout lily, wild ginger, violets, hepatica, bleeding heart, and squirrel corn seed. Why? Because that little white appendage, the elaiosome, is ant candy. It's loaded with fat and protein. They just eat it up, take it back to their nest, eat it up, and then they don't eat the seed because it's too hard. They deposit on their little compost pile, which is really good conditions for those to grow. So if you want to eliminate all your ants, you're not going to be a good wildflower grower. You got to put up with ants because they might plant a whole bunch of wildflowers for you. Now, just a little bit on some exotic wildflowers. I ran into this first one, the bull elephant head, when I was camping in Mount Rainier National Park in Washington State. It's a native of the northwestern part of the U.S., and I found this in late July, blooming in some alpine meadows. One of the most unusual shaped flowers that looks exactly the way it's named. Looks exactly like an elephant head. Now, the other one on the right is hoary puccoon. It's kind of rare. I've never seen it growing in Michigan or the Midwest, but it is native to this area apparently. But I took this picture at the Pyburn Trail in southern Missouri, and I like it. It's a nice, really sunny flower that mid-spring usually is when it blooms. A couple more exotic native wildflowers. Annual phlox, or Phlox drummondii. It's a winter annual, native to Texas. Now, I have had seeds for these. I just bought the seeds. Dark is required for germination. So just like the wild blue phlox, it requires dark conditions for germination. The other one I actually ran into in Oklahoma, and that one was the standing cypress. It's a biennial. It has a nice big spike with some orangey red flowers. Great attractant for butterflies and hummingbirds. Not native to this area, but to the southern states. Now, that's pretty much it. Many wildflowers are really easy to grow from seed. This is the Pyburn Trail that I was talking to you about before. When I was working on my PhD at the University of Arkansas, this was my go-to place to see spring wildflowers. Actually, that hoary puccoon picture was taken here, and maybe one of the other ones. Any questions? Yes?
When you talk about planting fresh,
Oh, yeah. No, it's not on.
check. When you talk about planting fresh seed, can you talk a little bit more about what that means? Because a friend gave me some pasque-flower seed and said, plant it immediately, and I didn't believe him, so I put it in my fridge and thought, okay, well, I'll just put it in my fridge, because it didn't make any sense to me to put it in the ground immediately since it couldn't grow. Does that mean when you have to plant it fresh when it blooms in the spring, it has to have a hot period throughout the summer, and then it'll germinate in the fall?
I've grown pasque-flower, but only from plants, and I'm not familiar with that one in terms of it, but when you're talking about fresh seed, you mean seed that has not, right from the plant. And some of them, like as soon as, actually even before, the guy I listened to was talking about growing like Trillium from seed, said, you really want to take those off. Because sometimes, like that one in Bloodroot, if the seed pod dehisces, it's probably too late. You might want to keep it, get its green, then it'll ripen up very quickly if you take it inside. As soon as it pops open and dehisces, which means it dries out and the thing separates, then you want to plant the seed. Now, I've done that and not been very successful because it probably dried out during the summer. So what you really could do is just take a pot and sink it into the ground and make sure it stays moist all summer. So when you do fresh seed, either that or hopefully the ants will do it for you. Yes?
Okay, for example, with Bloodroot, can you like dig up some and give to a friend? How does that work? Because I mean, I've never tried it. I just have it, but we were talking.
Bloodroot has a rhizome, and you'll find little nodes along the rhizome. So if you score it and then let it grow, or take part of that rhizome, and it usually grows, the parts of it that grow towards the end of the rhizome. If you cut it off and give them that rhizome, and they plant it immediately so it doesn't dry out, sure.
Would it be easier? Because sometimes when you have, like, they go from here over to there, would it be easier to just get one single one than from a lot of them?
That depends on whether you have plants growing along that whole rhizome. Because sometimes when you get towards the middle, there's no more shoots coming up out of it.
That far? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, wherever it ends up. And normally, if you do that, some of the buds that are back behind will grow next summer. Now, one thing I forgot to mention: these are my Bibles for growing wildflowers and woody plants. Growing and Propagating Wildflowers by Harry R. Phillips. Most of the plants I talked about are in here, and I use this as a reference. I made sure I checked on this before I made my presentation. Because I did research in woody plants, this is sort of the Bible for woody plant seed germination and treatments. The seeds of woody plant in the United States. This is an old version. I think the newer version is actually online. You can just Google this. It's a USDA agricultural publication.
Okay. Also, have you ever found that redbud is sometimes invasive? I mean, I have some and they just spew seeds all over, which is, okay, but.
That's why I mentioned in a lot of those wildflowers that they will self-seed. They're usually not aggressive, but they can be. So yeah, that is a concern. So in order to prevent that, you just have to take off all of the little pods before they. And
Hundreds and hundreds of.
I know. I've got pods over there in a bag that I took off some redbud seeds in my neighborhood. So I know what you're talking about.
I thought I just mentioned too, so Tom has mentioned, how long do you have to stratify the seed for? There's Prairie Moon Nursery has a great website where they list all, pages and pages and pages of plants, and they'll tell you what's the stratification method or what's the treatment that the plants need to germinate the seeds. So prairiemoon.org or .com or something like that.
Another really good web source is the Lady Bird Johnson National Wildlife Center in Texas. I actually refer to that for some of the stuff I did for the presentation. It's got a really good database. Yes?
Neil Dialbold in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Prairie Nursery
Yeah.
that has a catalog that
Yeah, it's
is
good.
worth dying for. All right. One of the things I'm really interested in is how the plants move about. And, you gave an example of the ants, but I think there are other creatures involved too.
Birds, for sure.
Right. And it just is amazing to me. I've had a garden growing for about 20 years in a woodlot. And, for years and years, nothing moved. And then after about 10 years or so, all of a sudden, everything started moving. And some of the plants would be 25 or 30 feet away from the original. And so I'm just wondering, what part squirrels may have or other little creatures may have in moving some of these about.
For tree seeds, squirrels definitely. And they never dig out. Chipmunks. Or maybe even mice
I think so.
could do that. Some of them might take some in their mouth and one drops off here, one drops off there, that sort of thing. I just mentioned the ones I know for sure. That's the way it happens. There's other possibilities.
Maybe one more question? Okay, comment.
The Friends of the Calhaven Trail have been working on clearing off a section of the trail between F and G Avenue. We've been removing garlic mustard for about 15 years, and the native plants have come back. And right now, the Dutchman's Breeches, the squirrel corn, the Trillium, hepatica, I think, is a little bit. Bloodroot's done, but trout lilies, they're all blooming right now. If you want to go this week. I mean, this weekend.
Is this off of 10th Street?
Well, yeah. If you go from the caboose to the first intersection, that's G, and the next intersection is F. So
Is that north of West Main?
Yes.
Okay.
It's gorgeous right now. Absolutely gorgeous.
I'm going there this weekend.
You need to go this weekend.
And the I don't know if I should. The Kalamazoo Nature Center has a great display of spring ephemerals as well.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, the Beach Maple Trail. And also, as you go towards Source Pond. Yeah, on there, I think that's even better in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Tom mentioned that he's got some seeds over there. He's gonna hang around hopefully for a little
Sure,
bit.
I'll hang around for a while.
You can hang around and talk with him. And he's got some seed packets on the table there that he said you're welcome to take.
Yeah. I got a number of species. I got the white form of great blue lobelia, which is kind of a rare one. I've got the redbud seed, which you may or may not want. And the one I think a lot of people would like, the variety of pink turtlehead that I have is really a deep color. I've seen other ones that weren't quite that, like rosy pink. They're more of a regular pink. So that one's there too. And that's the only one that really requires stratification. The blue star doesn't require it.
Amsonia you're talking about?
Amsonia tabernae montana, yeah. Yeah, that's the blue star, yep. So that one doesn't require any, neither does the redbud. The pink turtlehead does. The white form of the great blue lobelia does. But you could probably get away with 30 days rather than 60 for those.
All right, before we close out, I just want to make a couple of announcements. So our next Seedlings newsletter will be coming out, and that has information on all our upcoming programs and other programs related to native plants in the area. Our next in-person presentation is here on May 24th, whatever that Wednesday is in the 20th. And that is foraging for the future. So Brenna Pixley will be talking about foraging for plants in our local area, and she'll lead a field trip later in June. And then we've got the plant sale, and we've got the plant exchange coming up. So all that information's on our website too, so be sure and check that out. And direction, or the address for Tom's place for the plant exchange is there as well. Question? Sorry, I'm just going to take this, and then we're going to give Tom a big round of applause.
On this card, it says that the presentation on May 24th was at First United.
Oh, there should be a sticker on the back that says, we've moved all our programs to this location. Yes. So everything's going to happen here. All right, please join me in thanking Tom for his wonderful presentation.